أعوذ بالله الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. So this is our fourth lesson today, and in our lesson today we shall be talking about the research problem, the research objective, and the research question. And we shall also cover the significance of what? We shall also cover the significance of any research that you've been given. So in the beginning, they're basically telling us that these are our lessons objective. These are our lesson objective. By the end of the lesson, the learner should be able to, number one, define what a research problem is and explain its role in the research process. Number two, explain the purpose of research objectives and how they align with the research problem. Then number three, define what a research question is and explain its importance in guiding a research study. Then lastly, explain the concept of the significance of research and its role in justifying a study. So these are our lesson objectives today. Now, so the project introduction. So the introduction of any project or any report or any research is a critical part, and critical basically means it's very important. So the introduction is a critical part of any research, report, or paper because it sets the stage, for the study by clearly defining the research problem, stating the research objectives and questions, and explaining the significance of the research. So this is why the introductory part of the research, of the report, or any project is very important. It is because through the introduction, we get to know the research problem, the research objectives, questions, and the significance of the research. So number one, what we are going to cover is what is research problem. In Arabic, this is what is known as mushkilatul bahth. Because in any research you are doing, in any writing you are doing, there should be a reason that is driving you towards the writing. So what is a research problem? A research problem is a specific issue, gap, or question that needs to be addressed through systematic investigation. So this is in brief what a research problem is all about. So when we are talking about a research problem, we are basically talking about there is a specific issue, there is a gap or question that needs to be addressed through systematic investigation. It is the foundation of any research study and serves as the starting point for defining the purpose, scope, and direction of the research. So the research problem, it is the foundation. It is the root of any good study. So if you don't formulate your research objectively, then it is going to affect the whole report or the whole research. So a well-defined research problem identify what is known, unclear, or problematic in a particular field of study and provides a rationale for why it is worth investigating. So what you are basically saying here is that a research problem helps us to identify what is unknown, what is unclear, what is the problem, what needs to be solved. Then after that, you can go on to write your research. But if there is no problem, everything is clear, then there is no need of research. And when you are formulating the research, there is what is known as the research problem formula. This is very important. I need you to understand this. So the research problem formula is what is the gap between the current state of specific phenomenon issue and the ideal states, and what factors contribute to this gap. So if if you want to know, because you will be defending your thesis, you are going to defend your thesis. So when you are defending your thesis, they can ask you, the panel can ask you, what is your research problem? Can you define, give, in 2 minutes, can you explain to us what is your research problem? So how are you going to answer that question? So to answer that question, this formula is going to help you. So when you are explaining about your research problem, number one, the current state. You have to describe the existing situation or reality. So ما هو الموجود في ماذا يحدث في الأرض الواقع? What is happening now? Then the ideal state. Define what the optimal or desired situation should be. Ideal state means that if there is no problem, what should be happening? Then there is the gap analysis. Identify and analyze the discrepancy between the current and ideal state. So your research problem is the difference between it is the difference between the current and the ideal state. The difference is your research problem. So contributing factors. Explore the reasons or variables causing the gap. So when you are talking about any research problem, we are basically saying there is a gap. So when you are analyzing a research problem, you ask to ask, for example, if you're researching about maybe there is the effect of training and development to the performance of employee, maybe in a Dahabshil bank. So you have to ask yourself, what is happening? What is the current state in Dahabshil bank? Maybe the performance of employees is not that good. You know, then number two is what is the ideal state. The ideal state in the ideal state at Dahabshil bank is that the performance should be very good. That is the ideal state. You know, now what is the gap analysis? The gap analysis is the difference between the current state and ideal state. So I'll show you later. Now, what are the steps to develop a research problem? What are the steps? So for example, here we have a research problem. What is the gap between the current levels of employee engagement in organization X and the ideal levels of engagement? And what organizational factors contribute to this gap? So these steps will help you to identify and formulate your research problem. Number one, identify the phenomenon, identify the situation, clearly define the area of interest. What do you want to research about? Is it the employee engagement? Is it environmental sustainability? Is it educational outcome? Number two, define the ideal state. Use theoretical frameworks, best practices, or benchmarks to describe what ought to be. Then number three, assess the current state of the organization. Gather data or evidence to describe the present situation, because you cannot know if there is a problem in the organization unless you collect some data, unless you have some information. You will not know what the problem is. Then, number four, analyze the gap. Compare the current situation in the organization and the ideal state. What ought to be there? Then you identify the discrepancy. That is the difference between the ideal and the current. Then number five, explore contributing factors. Investigate why the gap exists. Is it, for example, lack of resources? Is it a policy issue? Or is it a cultural barrier, for example? So that is how you go about if you want to do what? To develop a research problem. So for example, steps to identify a research problem. So number one, when you want to do what? When you want to identify mushkilatul bath, a research problem, number one, review existing literature. Do a thorough research. Read journals, read researches that have been written by other people. So, identify gaps, contradiction, or unanswered question, for example, in the field of Islamic banking. So you cannot know if there is a problem if you don't review what other people have written. So if you read and review what other people have written, then you will realize maybe there is a gap. Tomorrow we'll talk more about the reviewing. Tomorrow we'll talk more about reviewing existing literature. Number two, identify practical issues. Look for real world problems faced by Islamic banks or their customers. For example, many customers are unaware of the differences between Islamic and conventional banking products, leading to low adoption rates. Then lastly, narrow down the focus. Ensure that your problem is specific and manageable. Your problem should not be wide. Your problem should not be very broad, because you don't have the time, you don't have the resources for a very large or a very broad research problem. So, for example, instead of studying Islamic banking, because Islamic banking is very broad, focus on what? The role of Islamic microfinance in empowering women entrepreneurs, maybe in Indonesia. So this is a more narrow than just researching Islamic banking is a very wide topic. So this is an example of a research problem. Look how the research problem has been formulated. So this is how you should be formulating your research problem. Despite the rapid growth of Islamic banking, there is limited understanding of how Sharia compliant financial products contribute to financial inclusion in rural areas. This gap in knowledge hinders the development of targeted policies to enhance the reach and impact of Islamic banking. So this is just but a very short paragraph, but if you read it, it is basically a very good formulated research problem. Because number one, it is showing us there is some limitation. So you should be using these words when you're formulating your research problem. There is a limited understanding. Not many people understand. So your research is your research wants to make it easier for people to understand. Then this gap in knowledge, so there is a theoretical gap that your research is going to fill. So this theoretical gap in knowledge hinders. So hindering means there is a challenge, there is a barrier. So by writing your research, you want to solve this problem. Now, what are the components of a research problem? So when you are writing a research problem, number one, there is always the context. That is the background or setting in which the problem exists. Like, where does the problem exist? Is it in Hargeisa? Is it in Mogadishu? Where? What is the context? Then the issue. The issue is the specific problem or gap that needs to be addressed. It is the mushkila that we need to fix. Number three, relevance. Why the problem is important and worth studying. Like, why do you want to study about this? Like, why are you writing? You know, the research problem normally answers the question, why are you writing this research? Because if you're writing a research, it means there is a very pressing problem that you need to fix. Then lastly, what the research aims to achieve by addressing the problem. What do you want to achieve by addressing this problem? So for example of a research problem, look at this. So context. In developing countries, access to clean drinking water remains a critical issue. So here we've defined the context. What is the context? In developing countries. So that is where we are going to focus with. That is where the problem exists. So what is the issue? Despite numerous initiatives, a significant portion of the population still lacks access to safe water. So this is the problem. This is the issue. Despite many initiatives, despite many attempts maybe by the government to fix this problem, a significant number of the population still, they don't have what? still they lack access to safe water. So why is this problem relevant? Why is it important? Because this problem affects public health, so we need to fix it. It affects economic. When people are sick, then they cannot really be productive. And also the quality of life. Sick people don't have good quality of life. So this is the relevance. That is why we need to research. Then the research problem. Now, what are the barriers to implementing effective clean water initiative in rural areas of country X? And how can this barrier be overcome to improve access to safe drinking water? So in brief, these are the components of any research problem. So you need to have the context, al-makan. Then number two, you need to be very specific to identify the problem. Then you need to tell us, like, why is this problem important? Why do you need to fix this problem? Then akhiran, the objectives, what the research aims to achieve by addressing the problem. Okay, so we are through with the research problem. Remember, the research problem, the research objectives, the research questions, they are related to each other. So from the research problem, we are going to what? To formulate the research objectives. From the research objectives, we are going to formulate the research question. And from the research question, it is also related to the research hypothesis. So these four things are related together. Research problem, the research objectives, the research question, and the research hypothesis. They are related, correlated. So what is a research objective? A research objective is a clear, concise, and specific statement that outlines what the researcher aims to achieve through the study. It defines the purpose and direction of the research, guiding the entire process from data collection to analysis and conclusion. Research objectives are derived from the research problem. This is what I was telling you. The research objectives are derived from the research problem and help to break down the broader aim of the study into manageable and measurable components. So when you are talking about the research objectives, number one, the research objectives, they give us the roadmap. They give us the direction as to the direction you are going to follow in your research. You know? Now, what are the characteristics? Of course, the characteristics of any objective, they need to be smart. Smart, the S is for specific. So when you are formulating the objective, clearly state what the research intends to accomplish. Measurable, allow for the evaluation of whether the objective has been achieved. So your objective should be measurable. We can easily measure it. Achievable, it should be realistic and visible within the scope of the study. So you should have a time scope that is realistic. It should be relevant, directly related to the research problem and purpose. Then it should be time bound. It can be accomplished within the time frame of the research. Now, types of research objectives. When you are writing a research, of course, it depends with the format of the university. Some universities, they'll have the general objective and the specific objective. In the Lincoln format, they don't have the general objective or specific objectives. So the Lincoln format normally is just the research objectives. You write the research objectives. But in many universities, the format is you have to have a general objective and specific objectives. But if you read carefully at the Lincoln format, they don't have it. And I don't know why, basically, because many universities, and in many universities, the general objective is normally the purpose of the study. So some universities, the general objective is the purpose of the study. Then the specific objectives, they are just the objectives. There is no specific objective. So they use purpose of the study and objectives of the research. Now, So what is the general objective? This is the overarching goal of the research. This is the الهدف العام. So we have أهداف هدف العام وأهداف الخاص. So this is the overarching goal of the research. It summarizes what the study aims to achieve in broad. The key word is broad terms. Example, to examine the role of Islamic banking in promoting financial inclusion in rural areas. Normally, the general objective, normally it is the title of your research. It is normally the title of your research, the general objective. Then the specific objectives, these are smaller, more detailed goals that break down the general objective into actionable steps. They often address specific aspects of the research problem. For example, to analyze the awareness and perception of Islamic banking products among rural population. So here you are analyzing the words, the awareness and perception. Number two, to evaluate the impact of microfinance on poverty alleviation. So here it's all about the impact of microfinance. Then three, to identify the challenges faced by Islamic banks in expanding their service. So these are the specific objectives that are related to the general objective. These specific objectives are going to help us to do what? To achieve the general objective. Now, what are the importance of research objectives? Number one, the research objectives, they provide us with the focus. They help the researchers stay on track and avoid unnecessary digression. Digression in the sense that it's just like the research objectives, it allows you to be in the tariq al-mustaqim, so that you don't, digression means you don't go astray. You don't go to unnecessary things. Number two, it guides the methodology. They inform the choice of research design. Which design are you going to choose? Data collection method and analysis techniques. They also facilitate evaluation. They allow for the assessment of whether the research has achieved its intended outcomes. It's through the research objectives that we can measure at the end of our research to see if we achieved our intended outcome. Then number four, enhance clarity. That is, they make the purpose of the research clear to stakeholders, including readers, supervisors, and funding bodies. Now, how to write research objectives? So you normally start with the research problem, identify the key issues or gaps that the research aims to address. Number two, which is very important, use action verbs. Begin each objective with a verb that indicates action, such as to identify, to analyze, to evaluate, to compare, or to explore. So if you look at all these verbs, they are action verbs. Then number three, be clear and concise. Avoid ambiguity. Ambiguity is something that is not clear. Avoid ambiguity and ensure each objective is straightforward and easy to understand. So if your objective is easy and straightforward, then your research, the whole of the research is not going to be complicated. But sometimes you find some students, they have research objectives. The research objectives are not clear. They are very long. They don't have action verbs. So you have to tell the students to formulate and reformulate again and again. Then ensure alignment. Make sure the objectives are aligned with the research problem, question, and hypothesis. Now we've finished with the research objective. So the research problem. Remember, the research problem is also from the research objectives. So a research question is a clear, focused, and concise question that guides a research study. It defines the scope and direction of the research, helping the researcher to stay on track and address a specific problem or issue. A well-formulated research question is essential for conducting meaningful research. So if you want your research to be very impactful, then you should have very good questions that will guide you. Because this question also determines the methodology you're going to use, the data collection method, and the analysis methods that you will use in your research. So what are now the characteristics or qualities of a good research question? So a good research question should be, number one, it should be easy to understand. It should be clear, easy to understand, and ambiguous. Number two, it should be focused. You need to narrow enough to be answered within the scope of the study. Then complex, not answerable with a simple yes or no, but requires analysis and exploration. So your research question should not be questions that require, for example, a yes, no answer. And a yes, no answers normally start with auxiliary verbs. Like, do you believe in A, B, or C? Yes, I believe in it. No. Those should not be, your research question should not be formulated using do you think, does it, no. So it should be complex, a question that is open-ended. So your question should not be closed-ended. Closed-ended questions are questions that only require a yes, no answer. But open-ended requires some explanation. The question should be relevant. They should address a significant issue or problem in your field. Then it should be visible. Visible meaning that it can do what? Can be answered within the time scope, within the resources that you're having, then within the data that is available. Now, types of research questions. So when you're writing your research question, of course, now you're doing your thesis. You can easily know from these types of questions which type of questions have you used in your research. Because most of you started writing your research. So research question can be categorized into different types based on the nature of the research. Number one, we have descriptive questions. These questions aim to describe phenomena or characteristics. So this question will be like, what are the key features of A, B, C, and D? What are the key characteristics of 1, 2, and 3? We have exploratory questions. They seek to explore new ideas or phenomena. For example, they always start with how. How do customers perceive A, B, C, and D? Then you have explanatory questions. They aim to explain relationship or causes. For example, what factors influence the adoption of Islamic banking in non-Muslim majority countries? Then sometimes we have comparative questions. Compare two or more groups, phenomena, or variables. Like, how does the profitability of Islamic banks compare to conventional banks? Then we also have evaluative questions that normally assess the effectiveness or impact of something. For example, how effective are Islamic microfinance programs in reducing poverty? Are they very effective? Are they less effective? So when formulating your research questions, it should follow under these 5 categories. Now, what are the steps to formulate a research question, for example, in Islamic banking? So, number 1, you need to identify a broad topic. Number 2, conduct a preliminary research. That is, review existing literature. Number 3, narrow down the topic. 3, 4, formulate the question. Then refine the question. These are just but example of research questions development. Now, what are the significance of these research questions? Now, this is the other part. This is the last part of our topic, significance of research. Remember in chapter 1, there is a place that you have to to tell us what is the significance of your research. Like, why are you writing this research? Who is going to benefit from this research? So the significance of research refers to the importance, relevance, and potential impact of a study. It explains why the research matters, who benefits from it, and how it contributes to knowledge, practice, or policy. So this part is very important in chapter 1. You really have to tell us, like, the beneficiaries of your research. You should identify all the stakeholders. So why is research significant important? Because they justifies the studies. It provides a rationale for why the research is worth conducting. If the research does not have a significance, then why are you doing it? If people are not going to benefit from it. It also guides the research process. It helps clarify the purpose and direction. It attracts funding and support. Research with clear significance is more likely to receive funding or institutional backing. So if your significance is very clear, the government can help you in your research. For example, the World Bank, the WHO, World Health Organization, if they know they are going to benefit from your research. That is why you normally have the research grants. Why do you think people are given research grants? So enhances impact. It highlights how the research can contribute to solving real-world problems. Then it engages stakeholders. It does what? It communicates the value of the research to audiences such as policymakers, practitioners, and the academic community. Now, the types of research significance. This is very important. So when we're talking about the research significance, number one, there is the theoretical significance. That refers to the contribution of the research to existing knowledge or theories. When you finish writing your research, what is it going to help in terms of is it going to add some knowledge? Is your research going to help with a new theory? Number two, practical significance. Focuses on the real world application and usefulness of the research finding. Is your research going to help us? Is it going to have some practical step of solving a problem? Methodological significance relates to the contribution of the research to the development or improvement of research methods, tools, or techniques. Is your research going to contribute? Maybe your research is proposing a new methodology that was not there before. Policy significance refers to the potential of the research to influence or inform policy decision. Is your research going to help the government, to legislate a new policy, a new law? Social significance focuses on the broader societal impact. How are people, the society, going to benefit from your research? Economic significance. How are people going to benefit financially? Is your research going to have any financial or economic implication? Then lastly, scientific significance. How is your research going to contribute, the contribution of the research to the advancement of science? So when you are writing the significance of your research, you have to mention how it's going to contribute to all these areas. Now, when writing the significance of research, consider the following steps. Identify the problem, explain the contribution of your research, highlight the impact of the research, target stakeholders, like who will benefit from the research, academics, practitioners. Mention each and every person who is going to benefit from your research, then be specific. Now, example of research significance. So we have a topic here, the impact of remote work on employee productivity during the COVID-19 pandemic. This is an example of a research topic. So from this research topic, look at the significance. This study contributes to organizational behavior theories by exploring how remote work affects productivity in crisis situations. Okay, the practical significance. The findings will help organizations design better remote work policies. Policy. The research provides evidence for policymakers to create guidelines. إلى غير ذلك. So you should mention all the people who are going to benefit from your what? Your research, and all the dimension has to be very clear. This is also another example. This research is significant for several reasons. First, it addresses a critical gap in the literature by exploring the role of Islamic banking in financial inclusion, particularly in undeserved rural areas. That is the first significant. Second, the finding will provide practical insight for Islamic banks to design products and services that better meet the needs of rural population. Finally, the study will do what? Will offer policymakers evidence-based recommendation to promote Islamic banking as a tool for poverty alleviation and economic what? Economic empowerment. So this is an example of research significance. Then lastly now, putting it all together. So you have a research topic, the research problem, research objective, research question, and the significance of the research. So this is normally how they are related to each other. So the research hypothesis is missing. The research hypothesis normally comes after the research question. So you have the research problem, the research objectives, the research questions, and we have the research hypothesis before the significance of the research. Now we have 2 minutes remaining. Is there any question, please? As I take the attendance, is there any question? Any question, please?
Teacher,
No.
Is there any relationship between the objective and questions and the conceptual framework? Is there any relationship?
Yeah, of course. When you're talking, yeah, there is a relationship. There is a relationship between the research questions, the research objectives, and the conceptual framework. Because at the end of the day, what normally happens in the conceptual framework, it depicts your research topic. That in your conceptual framework, you have what? You have the independent variable and you have the dependent variable. That is what is normally in your conceptual framework. And when you come to your research objectives, it has all these things. Your research objective, it has the independent variables and it has the dependent variables. If you go to your research questions, you have to have elements of dependable variable and the independent variable. So they are related. They are related together. Because the independent variable, dependent variable, it has to be in what? In your research question. It has to be in your research objective. It has to be in your what? In your research hypothesis. So they are very much related.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, is there any other question? Who has a good camera to take the attendance? Yesterday, some students were saying, somebody can take the attendance and send it to my inbox. If you have a good camera, take all the names, then send it to my Dahir. Can you take